to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 43rd episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is Dominic Moreno, and I've been in the ligand binding assay and cell and gene therapy space for over 27 years. I'm here with my co-host, John Perkins.
Hello, I'm John Perkins, and I've been in the LCMS bioanalytical space for around 26 years.
John and I are senior scientific advisors at KCAS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS services. I'm located in Kansas, John is in upstate New York, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we're kind of all over the map. We are excited to have you listening to the 43rd episode of the podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere: Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon, and many others. Whether you choose to find and play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you are joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. Today's podcast, as always, will review the latest news and resources, typically talk about COVID and non-COVID, and then a focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. So we're amped up to have you here today. We're looking forward to a fun episode. To kick us off for podcast number 43, John is going to go over today's podcast topic a bit more before we jump into the news and resources. John?
Okay, so today I'm a bit concerned how long we'll go on this podcast, so a word of warning for everyone, because the main topic is an exciting one. But we'll go through COVID news, non-COVID news, and there's some really interesting topics this week.
Should be, John, we're so excited to talk about this. Should be a great episode, a lot to go. John, kick us off with the news.
Sure. We spent all last week talking about vaccinations, so let's talk about vaccinations some more. But this is actually, we got interesting in terms of mixed results from two of the vaccines that we've been talking about for months now. And let's start with Novavax. So Novavax have published their phase 3 results. Shows 90.3 overall efficacy with 100% effectiveness against moderate and severe COVID-19. So it looks like that will move forward to emergency use authorization application in the third quarter, and then we'll have another vaccine to basically work against the pandemic, which is of probably less concern in this country, but certainly it's a valuable addition to the arsenal for other countries as we try and roll this across the world.
Yeah, John, we know that getting more vaccines approved, more effective vaccines, still in high demand, high need. These are falling into the more traditional, right? This is a non-mRNA based vaccine. So we're obviously there's a lot of talk about that these days in terms of, the mRNA vaccines and all that. So, it's again, John, this is, it's still ahead. One thing I want to touch on is I think still Novavax is if you don't know who they are, they're one of the world's, premier vaccine companies. And they're kind of, they're third to market or fourth, I guess now, or maybe even fifth. But it's still an incredibly fast process to get to where they're at, John, in my mind. So let's not lose sight of that. And like you said, this absolutely has probably this one I think is due to the less restrictions on cold, chain supply and all that. This could be an impactful one, and one we've talked about, John. And I think it's good to see it making progress. It's good to see it have over 90% efficacy. So yeah, this is great, and these are the things that will eradicate this.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key things about this. I mean, in terms of when this was announced, Novavax faced questions whether they could scale up production. I think they've been talking about partnering, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and also whether it would just be a booster for other vaccines in the US. And it might be there to complement the other vaccines, but ultimately that's not their market the way things stand right now. I mean, that I think there's over 150 million vaccinated in this country. Things are obviously moving forward, mainly with Pfizer and Moderna, but it's really looking at elsewhere. And in so in terms of that production, they have a agreement with COVAX for 1.1 billion shots, and they're actually partnering with the Serum Institute in India. So there is at least a mechanism to get shots out to to developing countries through that approach. So yeah, that was the good news. So
Yeah.
without spending too much time on it,
And
sorry, go
yeah, and it
on.
was good too that I think they even showed some efficacy in a bunch of different populations, and so all good
Exactly, yeah,
stuff. And we
yeah,
love the Serum Institute. I mean, I think I hope they're back on track, right? Like maybe that's something we can think about. But I know they were devastated by COVID,
sure.
and I think they're back. But it's good to hear. We know they're going to be a major player, I believe, in getting world health for COVID vaccines.
Yeah, because
Good stuff.
ultimately that's the most important thing. It's not just about this country; it's about everyone.
Yeah,
But to move on to so the not so optimistic news was actually CureVac have also published data on their first vaccine, and this is an mRNA vaccine,
Mm,
and the real hope for this one was it was more thermally stable,
yeah,
so it would really be that how to get the mRNA vaccine out to populations with the incomplete cold control chain, etc. But actually, the headline is CureVac blames variants as a closely watched COVID vaccine goes down in flames, failing pivotal study with woeful data. Thanks to Endpoints News for the hyperbolic headline. But ultimately, compared to other mRNA vaccines and other more conventional vaccines, it really did have really poor results. They showed an efficacy of 47%, which doesn't meet even the preliminary efficacy that the
yeah,
FDA and EUA said they would accept for a experimental vaccine. Now, CureVac's stance is that it's because they were having to deal with different variants, but ultimately that doesn't matter. Half the point of the vaccine is that ability to address as many cases as possible. Of the I think see I think they only had a very small amount of or one case based on the original virus, and then the rest were variants. But it's interesting when you dig into this that one of the variants that the I think almost half the cases were of the UK variant,
yeah,
but
yep.
we've actually got mRNA vaccines that are dealing with that perfectly acceptably. So, although I'm sort of I'm on the fence on this one, and I'll let you go, Dom, then we can say a bit
Yeah, no,
more.
I think you're well. There might be a reason why mRNAs need to be thermally stabilized.
Sure.
That's
Yeah. Yes, it
that's
does.
kind
Yeah.
of that's probably the unfortunately, I was very, I'll say, high on CureVac. I found it to be, had never heard of them. Kind of, if we think about it, maybe a year and a half ago, I certainly was kind of called them the dark horse and really thought they'd be impactful. But this isn't the first report that is poor news for them. I think it started to show maybe 3 or 4 months ago, John. There was some CureVac wasn't seeming to, they're kind of falling behind, and now clearly
Yeah.
they got to retool their vaccine, right?
I,
But you're right. It's an interesting thing that, and actually, it maybe even makes you think that the virus. Oh boy, I don't want to scare anybody with this statement. So this is just Dominic Moreno's opinions, but it's almost like the virus, the original, if you think of it that way. The variants are probably more prevalent than the actual virus if you
oh,
kind of read between the lines, right?
I,
That's what
I,
this means to me.
Yeah, I think that's undoubtedly the case. I mean,
Yeah,
certainly, some variants seem to have become more prevalent than others. I mean, the one that we talk about the UK, which I think is Alpha,
yeah, it
it,
is
it,
alpha.
it certainly took over in various countries, but now the one of concern is Delta, which is coming through, and we'll touch on that a bit more later.
Well,
But
I think with all this, it's before we had all these sophisticated tests, these things probably just happened, John.
yeah,
But we've
yeah,
got so
oh
much
yeah, yeah,
technology now. We're like, actually, as I sit here, I'm like, wow, I wonder if we'll start monitoring flu this way. Remember, there's a lot more, testing. You see ads for COVID-19 testing, like, oh, if you're going to go visit your family, get tested, right? So, all of that is really, I think, it's good. I want to be clear, it's good that we're doing this, but I also think maybe this rate of mutations shouldn't be or variants shouldn't scare everybody, John. I just think this is how viruses
oh
aggress, right?
absolutely,
This is
yeah,
a
I
natural.
yeah,
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I think it's a case of
And we're gonna, herd immunity is gonna take over, right? You said
sure, yeah,
UK and all that, but I think it's a shame CureVac didn't hit their endpoint here, but it's still very comforting to know that both the Moderna and the Pfizer one
sure.
are
And
protecting.
ultimately, CureVac, although they say they're progressing this vaccine, but when we talked last time about state of play of vaccines and next generation, CureVac are already working on a second generation with GSK. So that
Yeah.
may be that this one falls by the wayside, but they have a second one coming through, and of course GSK have been there before because their
Mm.
first vaccine with Sanofi bombed out, but they've now got a second one which is looking much more promising. So I mean, this is the nature
Yeah.
of medical research.
And they got
Sometimes
that. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Finish up.
sometimes the ones you expect to be the winners aren't. They fall by the wayside, but something better comes through behind them and ultimately fills the gap.
Well, I mean, they had the hype was it was thermally resistant, and so I think they've got some work to do, and I wish them well. I really do hope they can pull through on this, but I got a sense we won't see it in 2021, John.
No,
So
no likely not. No,
yeah, but
no.
it's still I don't know. I'll sleep better knowing there's companies like CureVac out there, and I'll
Mm,
keep chugging along, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yes. So we move
we
on
got
to
an
the next
interesting
one.
next story, John. Yeah, tell us a little bit about this one, man.
So this is yeah, and this impacts any of us who are sort of
Yeah.
starting to think about traveling and stuff because it's not. This actually is a Wall Street Journal article: COVID-19 visa backlogs, travel curbs strain businesses in need of workers, and the case study they start with is a Danish executive who works for Lennox Core, and based so he was obviously Danish, working in the US, but had family back in Denmark. And each time he was going back to Denmark, he had to get specific waivers to allow him back into the country, etc., etc. And it got to the stage where family issues were took over, and then I think he finally. Then there was actually tightening of rules that meant he couldn't travel, so he quit at that point and basically is staying in Denmark. Um, this is more a global thing. This is not pointing the finger at the US because this sort of travel restrictions. It definitely makes things like this more difficult. I mean, we were talking to family last week
Mm.
and saying, well, what's going on with if we're all fully vaccinated, what's our restrictions for coming into the UK? We still have to have quarantine for 2 weeks, even though we're fully vaccinated. So it's like the regulations haven't caught up with the science here. So where we've got advice here saying that if you're fully vaccinated, you can pretty much do anything. I mean, in moderation, but it's the red tape piece hasn't caught up to that, and there's a lot of other things going on in the workplace, which is why I wanted to mention
Yeah.
this article.
Yeah.
Um, I'll let you chime in, and
Yeah, no, I
I'll
think I think when you say, oh well, what's so big about a Denmark executive not being able to, and he had to quit his job, but that is
that's the tip of
that's
the ice.
talent loss, right? That is kind of a big deal. But then
Yes.
as it bears down, John, and if you've ever been to any coastal summer resort area I know I've been to a few in Maine, and you get to parts of the Cape Cod, and even if you go down to like Walt Disney World for that matter, right? But there are a lot of foreigners, right? Some of the story reads like 50 to 60% of the workforce during the summertime is foreign people, right? So this has been cut off, and we already know there's a work shortage, right? You
Yep.
can't. My local pub isn't open on Mondays still, right? So all these things are, and now you factor in this usually swell of summertime workers that aren't getting here, and John, it's as they said there, it sounds like in one main town they're fighting over employees. So
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
impacting things. And even like they mentioned in northern Iowa, the Cedar Point amusement park they're closed 2 days a year, and that's just, I don't know, it kind of like, I guess we got to power through it, right? We can't. I understand the restrictions.
Yep.
The 2 weeks is a little confusing to me to some degree because if you're vaccinated, but this just kind of stinks because I want to go away this summer, and it feels like it might still be, even though things are open, they're not going to be open if no one's
Yeah.
there to open them.
It's one of those things you want to get back to normal, but it's what you're seeing is there's all these different things are impacting life getting back to normal, because like you say, there is this swell of foreign workers coming in, and some of it's like students who have like got summer jobs, and it's their building experience, etc., but they can't do that. Yeah, I mean, you got, obviously, like you mentioned the amusement park. You got restaurants. I mean, the restaurant thing is definitely is a major issue. I mean, in the UK, you're having like almost a recalibration. I mean, the restaurant business is a hard business to work in. In terms of hard hours, it's a tough job to do, and people are rethinking what whether they want to go back to that job or not. So you've actually got restaurants. We've got one locally here that said they were going to open in May because that was when outdoor dining was being introduced. They still aren't open, and I really want them to open because it's one of my favourite restaurants in the area. And the notice on the door says they can't get the staff to reopen.
No.
There's another restaurant I just read about this week, Pied de Terre in London, which is a Michelin-starred restaurant. They're cutting out lunch services because they can't get the staff. So this sort of poaching staff from each other, that will be going on everywhere. Everywhere you look, restaurants and food businesses have got notices on the door saying we've got openings for sous chefs, front of house, back of house, etc., etc.
Managers.
So this is a really, really, really major issue.
Yeah, little side note, teenagers are being managers of fast food restaurant chains because, when I say teenagers, like 18, 19-year-old people are making 70 grand a year working as a manager because no one else will do it.
Yeah, sure.
They had a couple stories this week about that, and I don't know. It's I guess we're not going to solve it, John, but I hope I have some vacations planned. I hope I don't walk up to a saltwater taffy store on the boardwalk in New Jersey and it says closed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think
just very well could.
So my only comment on it says, please be patient with the people that you do deal with in these restaurants, etc., because they're short-staffed and their life is probably very difficult.
You're right, John.
So
you are so right. They are exhausted.
Yes.
Absolutely. Most of the, I a couple places I go to, like you get to know some of the people working there because you see them a few times a week, right? But they're one of the place that closed on Monday. They're so happy about it, but the other 6 days a week, there's they got like 8 people who are they're just like, yeah, I'm here from 10 in the morning until 2 at night, and looking for really not much. You can see some of the when they shifted to taking Mondays off. It's funny, they all kind of hang out, which was weird, but it helped them. But clearly, John, this is as the summer wears on. You're right. Be patient with your waiting staff. Don't and I say to all the waiters and waitresses out there to kind of, also we understand you're exhausted. We feel for you, but hopefully you won't throw the food on our lap, so to speak. But it is something that I think as the summer wears on, I would be surprised if in August you don't hear about just altercations because temperatures run high when you're exhausted, right? That's just human nature.
Exactly.
So,
and it's interesting. So we talked before about other industries and what's it going to mean for the work week in terms of working from home or like the banking industries insisting people be there on site, etc. But actually, I know there's the restaurants, a number of them in the UK that I've been sort of keeping an eye on. They're starting to experiment with work weeks for people, so talking 4-day weeks rather than the 5, and so really playing about with how they can try and give staff some sort of balance in life on that. So it's interesting how this virus, how it permeates into all different bits of life and gets people thinking about the way we've been operating for years, is that really the way we should be operating, or can we do things a better way? So
that's a big one, John. Yeah, and you're right. We're going to move on, I guess, but you said a lot there, and what's the new norm, and I think we could do a whole podcast on how COVID has influenced and changed the drug development field and how working from home has worked. And there are certain, I don't want to just say supportive, but there's a lot of people in our industry that we really they don't need to be there. They can be functional, but and then I could counter that, right? You can counter that with some other, camaraderie and just getting to know your teammates. If you can do it virtually, but it's always seems to be a little bit better when you see each other, right? So
it's always nice to see people face to face. Absolutely.
But it is even my wife's dealing with that. She's her company's talking about bringing people back, and the reality is a lot of places you're going back. They're overcrowded. There's no room, and so why are you going back, right? So that's the other kind of issue as well, with especially in our field. But I feel John will maybe let's move on to the next article. But life has certainly got a different feel to it, and may never go back to what we
Oh,
experienced
sure. Yeah, yeah.
pre-COVID. And
Well,
maybe
I
it's
mean,
good too. I'm not saying
and
it's all bad. I don't want to make
yeah,
it sound like it's a
I
dark.
know, and obviously, if it doesn't, we'll still keep talking about it and go,
Yeah.
"Oh, the good old days." Oh,
Well, actually, John, let's move on. We got to. Obviously, today's main topic is one that both you and I are. It's gonna probably get us a little fired up, right? So,
so,
tell us a little bit about this South African
so
consortium, right?
yeah, a South African consortium establishes mRNA tech transfer hub to get vaccines to a region often overlooked by pharma. Now we've touched on Africa a number of times because in terms of the world, it's the continent that has the slowest vaccination rate. Currently, 38.1 out of every 100 people have received any vaccines at all. Um, for this hub is going to be based in South Africa, and even in that country, only 3.5% of South Africans have received a jab, but 58,000 have already died from the virus. And he also mentioned previously that some African countries haven't done anything at all in terms of vaccination. But this is the WHO and COVAX announced the support of a South African consortium to establish a COVID-19 mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub. So they'll be partnering with Biovac, Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, the African CDC, and the network universities will come up with details with the South African government to establish ground rules. So obviously this is early days, but I think it's a critical step if they can make it work. Now, the one buried deep in this article, there's this single sentence that sums it all up. That says, if a drug maker is willing to offer up its offer up its IP to the portal, production could start within 12 months, which sounds fantastic. However, if the current intellectual property holders say no, we're not letting it go, then basically Africa's starting from scratch to try and do this thing. So it's going to take much longer. And now, to give a little bit of credit, BioNTech said they wanted to establish manufacturing in Africa over the next 5 years, but ultimately that's not quick enough. When we got from diagnosis of or characterization of the virus to a vaccine within a year, to then say, well, it's going to be another 5 years before we can get any manufacturing on this continent, that's not going to impact a continent of hundreds of millions of people. And at that point, I'll step off my soapbox and pass it on to you.
No, it's good. No, I think I'll just highlight a few things. I think it's unbelievable that Africa has just 3.1 out of 100 vaccinated. I mean, that is just I don't understand, right? Because I feel like we got stockpiles of vaccines sitting in America here, and I know there's cold chain and all this, but it's just I don't
Well,
know. I don't know. And then the doctors, the Doctors Without Borders, good for them. Like, they're right. I don't understand. And I guess maybe I'll just stop, because I feel like there's probably like politics and greed involved with what's
yeah,
happening. But it just gets you. It makes you say, well, and good for them for saying, hey, that's too long. We'll keep an eye out on this. But it just seems like we should, the rest of the world, it should be real easy to just, I don't know, find a way to get like a couple million doses in there and start vaccinating people. But in some countries they haven't even started vaccinating. So it's like, I don't know, John. It's hard to sit here and think like, if I got on my app right now and tried to get there's probably 50 appointments within couple half a mile, 2 mile from my home, where I can go get vaccinated. So it's like, I don't know, maybe it's always existed and I didn't realize it, in terms
I,
of just how privileged or blessed, or however you want to think of it, that we are
I,
here, right?
I think this has definitely highlighted that. I mean, we know early on the Western countries who had put some money basically made sure that they had sufficient supply to inoculate all their population. That's where the African countries have no clout at all, so they really are just begging for scraps. COVAX has shipped vaccines to over 130 countries, but 80 of those needed help with funding.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you the magnitude of the issue that you're dealing with here. And even those, it says over half of those 80 countries have completely run out of the doses they've received, while others have held on to some as reserve stock, and well over half will not have sufficient vaccines to be able to sustain programs government officials have put into place. And I mean, looking, I always come back to the UK, but the UK is talking cutting overseas aid as well.
Really?
This is,
Huh.
yeah, seriously, this is part of the ongoing debate in the UK, and this all plays into this. Again, we're not going to have a healthy planet if we can't roll this out to everyone. If we just say, well, we're healthy and you can fend for yourself, that's not good for the long term of the planet. So we need to resolve this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good these articles. We're not. It seems like the momentum to vaccinate the world is slowing, John.
Y-
Right, and that's
y-
bad. That's kind of. But this story is like a little bit of a ray of light, and really, I
yep,
think some people would say, "Hey, the African nations got to help themselves," and they are. But John, I didn't want to. There's one line in here that really is probably the root of it. Right, this has caused inequity in who receives the jabs and led to exorbitant prices and
yep,
alternative
yep,
arrangements.
yep,
So
yep.
if a country gets 1 million doses, it's only going to go to that 1%, right? It's not making its way to whoever maybe needs it. And we had some of that early on here in the U.S. even, right? There was some
Yep. Yeah, you
some
got the
people
queue
who were
jumpers.
non-essential getting
Yep.
vaccinated. Well, anyhow, this is John, I as I sit here, it's like, well, hope is not a plan, right? So um, it makes me, the WHO hasn't always been my favorite organization, but it really does make me want to either try to donate or at least try to promote it or whatever. But the Doctors Without Borders is probably our best hope for this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I think this, to me, this is so critical. We'll keep
Yeah.
revisiting it, and I'll keep an eye on it because
Yeah,
it's
and
hugely
I hope as
important.
we get maybe some of the MR, there is some challenges with
Sure.
the thermo, and it's a shame. I haven't even seen what's happening with J&J. I don't know if they're retooling or what, but maybe we'll just try to revisit some of that in time. But I think the more stable vaccines are probably the way to go there. Although you know the most effective, clearly today the most effective appear to be the mRNAs, right? So
Sure.
anyhow,
Absolutely. Yeah.
well,
I mean, I
good
think.
stuff, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is actually interesting that an article that I didn't put into the agenda at all was really talking that the mRNAs have been that sort of poster child for vaccination here. But this we did touch on it last time about how these other vaccines coming through really are the key to inoculating the world. I mean, it's so, and the article I'm citing in particular was talking about Sanofi GSK, which has a second generation that looks much more promising than the first, and that will have a role because this is where it's going to go. It's not going to come to the US. It's going to the rest of the world where it's needed. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no, John, we're running. It seems like we're running a little long, but it's like COVID is still so prevalent, right? It's so prevalent in
Mhm.
our lives. There's so much going on, and I think we could probably spend the whole entire podcast just going over it because you're taking highlights of COVID things, right? So
Yeah.
there's so much going on, but we're gonna but maybe let's move on, John. I feel like we got a big agenda that I'd like to get to. How much of this non-COVID do we want to skip around, or you just tell me which the
Well,
next
we
article?
can we can go through any of them quickly. I mean, let's go next one. Vex by vectors: how COVID-19 vaccine and cell and gene players are tackling the viral vector bottleneck. So basically, viral vectors are engineered viruses that are used to deliver gene therapies, cell therapies, and vaccines, and they're running up. We're
Yeah.
running out. So I just thought I threw that out there. If we want to say a bit on that, we can then move on.
No, I think you're right. So there's all these great things like CAR T cells and all these great other vaccines that aren't, they're starting to come in our world. They're coming back, right? Where the clinical trials are booming and so forth, or at least coming back. And we see there's even more, on the CMC side of manufacturing. Those companies are. But to your point, John, like yeah, supplies are going to run short on all of this, not just manufacturing space. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of not from let alone serum from animals is a huge issue, especially non-human primates. And then there's certain types of pipettes that aren't available. I mean, there's a lot of supply chain issues that are like bubbling at the surface in our industry, and we could be factor in the lack of people working in restaurants. it's got to be impacting probably manufacturing facilities are exhausted, and it's all just. I feel like there's this. We could come to, I don't want to say a grinding halt, but we could have some real challenges before 2022's out with supply chain. 2021
Sure.
is over
Yeah.
with supply chain, and so I think that's what that to me that's the first thing, and it talks about other sort of more sophisticated or more rare items that they need. But I think in general, and of course the cost is going to go up, John. That's really some of what's going to happen here.
Well, yeah, we certainly saw that with like NHP,
Yeah.
plasma, etc. Yeah,
But I think you'll see it in like it's only a matter of time until we'll see it at the doctor's office, right? I think everything's going to kind of go up because of this, this lack of let's call it supplies, right? Then
Sure. Yeah, so but it's interesting how much of a trend we're talking to cell and gene therapy, but it could really be slowed up, not because of this the research portion of it, but actually the gearing up to supply once something's approved. Because I think we're talking there's a number of things have been approved, but they were talking about expecting 100 more. 14 gene therapies are already approved and sold in UK, Europe, Japan, and the US, with 100 more expected over 6 years that are all following this approach. So there's a manufacturing bottleneck here. So anyway,
and every cell and gene therapy, every cell product is going to need a manufacturing suite, and we just know they're building manufacturing for COVID things. So that's still going to take the priority, but I don't know. It's to be determined. And they mentioned some of the big CDMOs that are that have built up, and as they build those buildings, they're already at capacity. And John, it's one that we're going to keep an eye on. But maybe let's go on to the next one. We'll just crank out the last two here, John. Tell us about some. I always like a good antibiotic resistance story.
Well, it's impossible for me to pass over too, because this is making drug-resistant bacteria susceptible to antibiotics. And antibiotics are so key to human health, but obviously build up a resistance is a long ongoing concern, and it's getting more. So it's now looking at how can we better address this? And a lot of the focus to date has really been on coming up with different chemistries that might get round the antibiotics resistance, but that still builds up. This is actually a group at the New York University School of Medicine come up with a different strategy where they've actually looked at what's the defense mechanism that protects bacteria from normally lethal doses of antibiotics. And so what they said that some bacteria switch to a dormant state to survive in a process that's mediated by production of hydrogen sulfide, and there's also there's a CS I've got.
It's the synthethine gamma lyase. Yeah, it's an enzyme.
So there's basically a protein that's key to that. But if you deactivate that, then you can reduce hydrogen sulfide and then help antibiotics get in. And this team actually screened like 3 million compounds and identified 3 that could potentiate existing known antibiotics and make them active again. The 2 being that they cited were gentamicin and I can't remember what the other one is, ampicillin. So these are really well accepted antibiotics, but finding this different approach may give us another string in our bow to tackle the resistant bacteria.
Yeah, no, this is critical. Good stuff. This CSE or cystathionine gamma lyase is really, it's a breakthrough thing. And like you said, they cleverly screened thousands, found a couple, and you got some small molecule inhibitors that are potentially gonna, really, really help out, right? Like as you said, they increased the efficacy of gentamicin and all these other kind of pretty well established antibiotics. So, great stuff. I think it's one that you wonder, when we hospital visits and things of that nature, how much, and then even like sports was really where a lot of this was coming from, Mercer and things of that nature, right? So
sure.
But I think as we get some normalcy back, we are eventually going to have to. We're already starting to see some of that. It's good to know because these things are going to pop back up, right? I think I think overall antibiotic prescriptions, everything went down, right, during the
Yep.
pandemic. And one can only imagine as we get back out there, you'll see more of this.
Ye-
But
It was
yeah, no, it's good to know
interesting.
it's out there, and it's about. I want to say it's about time. Is that bad? It seems like this seems like one that might actually work. I haven't seen too many others that a lot of shots on goal, but this seems
No,
to have some teeth to it.
it seems to have potential, which is why,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was worth discussing. And it's interesting you talk about how things have declined and will probably pick back up. Saw yesterday that GSK are talking relaunching Shingrix, their shingles vaccine, because the expected uptake of that has really been down because of
Sure.
COVID. But as things are starting to return more to normal, they think it's time to relaunch to really highlight what
Yeah.
Shingrix can do.
Yeah, unless you're really on top of it, I had to go through the drive-through flu vaccine, right? So I'm sure just in general, hospital visits were way down.
Sure.
So things like
Yep.
that
Yep.
went down. And one could only imagine there's a slower wave, right? So one could expect in the coming years, things like shingles and all that might pop up. So, all right, John, I think that we got one. That was the last for our. Oh no, we got one more. This is a
Do,
good one.
do one
Yeah,
more, and
we got
again,
one
this
more
this is
non-COVID.
this this is
Yeah,
this is
it
really
leads
quick
into
and
our
brief.
story. Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
this is really good. Bristol Myers, Eisai, and Lundbeck allied to bring down blood-brain barrier, and that's so. The reason why this is key, the barrier between the blood and brain actually really is a barrier to developing treatments for brain diseases because drug candidates can't get to their targets and the concentrations needed to have therapeutic effects. So this is a long term issue that pharmaceutical companies have had to deal with. One thing I like about this is it's three companies coming together and they're working with a group at Harvard, at Harvard's Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering. So it builds on that. We talked about collaboration all the way through COVID, and here's a similar thing. They're all coming together in a collaboration to help solve this, knowing that once they have a way forward, they're going to go off in their separate directions with their own different candidates, etc. But it's basically they're looking for protein to help carry antibodies over that barrier to then facilitate delivery of large molecule drugs.
Yeah, no, and John, I think the real highlights and why you're talking about this is it's pretty. Um, the word unprecedented is so overused. I don't want to use that word, but it is warm and fuzzy feeling to see Bristol Myers, SI, and Lundbeck all coming together. So three heads are better than one type of mentality, and then whoever, if you still have the right to go, kind of as a good steward to your organization, go sell it when you're done. But the idea of this type of collaboration just simply would have never happened pre-COVID. Just there's no way these type of companies, in my opinion, we'd never seen it unless I'm mistaken. But to see three big pharma companies kind of tooling their resources and coming together and sharing, and just great. And hats off to the Harvard's Weiss Institute for being in the middle of it, and let's see what happens. But this is the type of stuff that is going to accelerate medicine. And as you mentioned, the blood-brain barrier is something that boy, there was a lot of there's still a lot of I don't know if it's unknowns, but we in the past it was proteins can't get past it without some sort of um, active energy, right? You needed to um, either put a protein on there that could bind to a receptor or had some sort of ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Now that isn't entirely true. Um, so there's some seeping events that happen. There's, your brain can't swell, and without getting all nerdy on you, John, it becomes an immune privileged area, right? You can't, you know how you get an infection and you kind of get some swelling in your lymph nodes, or perhaps even you get some pus coming out. That all can't happen in your brain, right? So the immunological responses has to be different, and that's why you've got this blood-brain barrier. Now, it's great evolution to have that, but it makes it a real therapeutic challenge to get a
Sure.
protein across it. And that's where they're going after it. And I think, there's some ways to get through it, but they also, a lot of it does, and I think it's swelling of the brain's encephalitis, I believe, right? Or at least swelling somewhere in there. I think that's what encephalitis is. So that's still a challenge, even if you find. So they have models of ways to get through it, but it becomes almost detrimental too, right? You can't suddenly you got this massive influx into the brain. So good for them. I hope they find the right keys to the door, so to speak.
Sure,
That's how I think.
absolutely. Yep.
There's my
To me,
hey, by the way, there's my diatribe, John. No.
sure. To me, it's like the non-COVID articles. We're looking for things that really could make a difference in the long term of medicine, and a couple of those things
Yeah.
today really could be big.
John, we did get some feedback from one of our audience members, but I think due to time, we're going to have to shelve that because that's a big discussion. Jason had asked about, not just vaccines, like asked a little bit around wanted to know our thoughts on the mRNA vaccines and then also with children. But we're going to have, I think for the sake of time, let's shelve that, John, and we'll get to it at the
Yeah,
next episode.
I think that there is that. Yeah, just to combine with that, there's news articles have come out about the infection and deaths and how it's impacting non-vaccinated versus vaccinated, and it's definitely
Yeah,
we'll,
I
we'll,
think the
we'll
audience
touch
should hear
on.
that one, John. Why
Yeah,
don't you
and
share we'll take a
we'll
moment and share some staggering numbers around if you've been vaccinated and how it helps you against the variant.
I'll touch on it now, but I certainly we'll talk about it more next time as well. But just an article that came out yesterday said that government data from May shows that of 18,000 deaths, COVID-19 deaths in May, 150 people were fully vaccinated, representing about 0.8% or 5 deaths per day on average. So, sorry, let's say 0.8% of those 18,000 deaths in May were down to vaccinated rather than non-vaccinated people. So, it really showing that vaccination's making a difference. It's also I've
John?
also seen a number of other articles, and I'll stop at this point.
Yeah,
A
we're going to
number
go
of other
all day,
articles.
but we're going to
Sure,
I'm going to give you one thing that happened in my
sure,
world since the last time we had a podcast. I
sure,
used my uni grill, John, made some pizza on it. I had the wrong, so it's a 12-inch uni, right? And I had a 14-inch kind of pizza picker, the spatula for it, and
sure.
that created a problem because after I got the pizza in there, I was like, crap, how am I going to get it out now? Because I kind of had to use like a spatula, literally like a stove spatula, or a standard kitchen spatula. But I used it and it was delicious. It didn't look pretty, but stay tuned and hopefully I'm going to maybe take a crack at it this weekend. But I was so excited to use my little Uni grill and lots of other things in my world, John, but I'll stop there. And if you want to share something, otherwise, I'll see you in the funny pages.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to say here. It's it's just been a more run of the mill week. It's sort of we've got a cat with an eye infection, so she went to the vet yesterday. So hopefully that'll be sorted out. But that's about it.